There we go. Hi, everyone, and a warm welcome to this webinar with the enticing name of From Crisis to Consensus. My name is Ida Sandjärde. I am the Shanghai area manager at the Swedish Chamber of Commerce in China. Before we start, I would like to mention that this webinar is conducted on our partner Kudo's platform. Kudo provides simultaneous interpretation for online meetings. In today's session, there is Chinese and English language for you to choose. So please choose your language at the bottom left corner of the interface. You can switch language whenever you like, and you can also change the setting of your interface if that makes things better. So now I am pleased to welcome Gabor Holch. Gabor is the founder and general manager of Campanile Management Consulting. And he is our guest today to share with you 4 alternative cultures of storming in teamwork, based on the ICF accredited Global DICS assessment and coaching system, 20 plus years of worldwide consulting experience, and cases from Nordic firms in Asia. Thank you so much, Gabor, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ida, and thank you very much for having me at this event. I have worked with the Swedish Chamber a couple of times in person, and now here we are. We are working with each other most of the time on Zoom or Kudo or any other platform. And indeed, what I'm going to talk about is not just how to deal with conflict, but also how conflict is created between people against best intentions, and also what our different perceptions are about conflict and how they influence the way we approach it. So although I cannot see all of you this time, and my strong preference is for face-to-face meetings where I can read your body language, but I will ask you to not just to listen to us like listening to the radio, but also to be active, follow what's happening, and at one point I will also ask you to contribute your ideas. I will follow a sequence that I often use in my coaching, in my workshops, and in my advisory work as well, starting from awareness. So just imagine that anybody asks you to change anything about your behavior. I like using the example of somebody sitting next to you while you drive and asking you to drive faster or drive slower. The first thing that you would do is look at the meter, how fast you're driving now. So this is exactly what we do in terms of conflict management as well. If somebody says, add more empathy, or if somebody says, be a little bit tougher, stand up for yourself, the first question that we ask is where I am now in terms of these kind of behaviors. Then we will look at a couple of skills. Obviously, we are going to summarize in something like 10 minutes what sometimes we summarize over 3 two-day workshops, so we will be fast. And I don't know too much about your background, your needs. So this is number one, while I will ask you for your ideas, for your contribution. And secondly, why I'm trying to keep as much time at the end for interaction as possible. And then finally, awareness, skills, and the rest of it is habits. Even if we do a 2-day leadership workshop focused on, let's say, managing conflict or managing crisis, we cannot deal with the habits bit, because habits form and play out over time. So this is really up to you. What we can imagine is that anything that we are saying at an event or a training or a coaching program faces you in the right direction, and then you have to start walking. But I will also, obviously, beyond just knowing how to keep in touch with the chamber itself, I will also show you a couple of ways to keep in touch with me and see things online that is freely available and could help you to work with these, turn these skills into habits, so to speak. Later, I will show you that if you want to find me online, all you have to do is just know my full name, because there are many Gabors and many Holches, but there is only one Gabor Holch. So crisis to consensus, basically meaning how to work together with people constructively, even if you don't necessarily agree with their ideas. And we are going to look at different cultures, Now, usually my day job is intercultural leadership consultant, and I will tell you a little bit more about intercultural leadership consulting and what intercultural leadership is. This East-West leadership is a quasi-brand that I use because my focus is Europe-Asia cooperation in both international relations and corporate. Okay, so why does culture matter at all? Very often when I tell somebody that I deal with intercultural skills, and especially if it's a high-level manager who comes from a specific area of business, they say, oh, Gabor, I know culture is absolutely fascinating. It's really interesting. I read a couple of books about it. Thank God that we are working for an engineering company, or that we are a law firm, or that we are an architectural agency. So culture doesn't really affect what we do. But what I'm going to show you now is culture is actually in everything that we do. So just think about it. If some of you come from a sales background, of course, negotiations, convincing people, helping people to decide, and actually the mental process that people use to decide, for example, to choose between 2 or 3 competing products or services is very, very culturally dependent. So very simple things such as, how do you start a meeting, even if that meeting is online? Do you use, let's say, a quarter or 1/3 of the meeting time to establish rapport, to chat, to ask about the background of people, and then you can go into business, which would be very often what we think as the Asian style, but actually also, for example, I'm talking to you from Spain, people do the same thing here. Or do you get down to business? Actually, the Swedish style is closer to that. And then if you have a little bit of time at the end, do you, by the way, ask, have you seen the game? How is the weather at your place? And so on. The same thing about marketing. If you come from a marketing background, you know that, for example, how you address your audience. One of the famous Swedish companies is IKEA or IKEA, depending on what kind of English you speak, that in any kind of language uses a very indirect, a very friendly style of communication with the client. Even in medicine, medical doctors, medical professionals, they approach their patients in a different way. There are societies like Japan where the doctor is the authority and the patient basically follows their advice. And there are in other societies where medical personnel is supposed to be a service provider and customer is king. Law, just think about things like transparency or corruption. Where does one end and the other one begin? If you take out your suppliers for a nice meal, or you take them out for a vacation, or you give them a gift, where does politeness and, in China we like to say, guangxi, and corruption begin? Finance, you have to make a transfer, a money transfer. How much do you exactly transfer? How flexible it is? Cash and non-cash payments, and so on. Architecture, you know that cities are designed differently according to people's needs. And even engineering. One of our favorite examples these days is that self-driving cars behave differently depending on where the code was designed. Japanese cars, American cars, European cars, Chinese cars, they make different decisions based on where they come from. So culture is going to influence basically everything that you do in business. Now, another explanation that I would like to give you before we go into crisis is the difference between cross-cultural and intercultural. So cross-cultural is what you can see at the top and left of this slide. Basically, one nationality doing business with another nationality. If we ask, how does this German gentleman do business with Chinese people, that's cross-cultural. How do Swedish people do business with Korean people? That's cross-cultural, between two cultural groups. But most people these days, as soon as they leave the comfort zone of their home culture, they actually start interacting with multiple cultures, just like you can see in the other two pictures. So just figuring out how to do business with Chinese people is not going to be enough. most people who do business internationally. And also I will show you that it's not just about nations. It's also about doing business across sectors, genders, age groups, and much more. Why the differentiation is important is because you are going to aim at a completely different skill set if you do business in a diverse environment. So for example, if you read a book or listen to a podcast about doing business in China, very often they will just tell you, if you do business in China, you have to speak good Mandarin, so make the efforts. You have to know about the legal system, have to build a guanxi. But let's say you are somebody who does business in 5 different Asian countries. Are you supposed to learn all the 5 languages? Are you supposed to know the intricacies of all the 5 social systems? So intercultural skills is what I'm specialized in. They are actually supposed to give you a skill set that you can use while you're navigating your business across several and quite different cultural backgrounds. Okay, so now it is the time for 2 things that I promised to you. Number 1 is when I hope that you can contribute a little bit. And the second one is that I'm going to stop my slide sharing for a minute and just take a quick look if anybody has questions or we have technical issues. So I would like to ask you, while I'm speaking in the next 10-15 minutes, to keep your comments and questions coming. Specifically, what I would be very interested in, since I don't know you and we are not face-to-face, so I don't have the opportunity to ask you directly, why you signed up for this webinar. So basically, when you heard the topic or you saw the topic online, from crisis to consensus, hosted by the Swedish Chamber, what was the story that sprang to your mind? And if you do have a good example for you that you would like to see analyzed and explained a little bit more in detail later, then I would like to ask you to send us a summary of just 2 or 3 sentences. Please don't write a short story to us, because then we are not going to have the time to look at it in detail. So I would like to give you a little bit of context about what conflict is and why I am the one who is making this presentation and not you. So what is it that I have done, or I have experienced, or I have thought about that makes me the person to talk to you about these skills. In the meantime, whenever you have a good example for us, again, the way we imagine it is 2 or 3 complex sentences to just describe something that you would like to discuss. Later, of course, if you want to comment on what you wrote, you will be absolutely welcome to open your mic for a minute and explain to us what the situation is and why you need help with it. Actually, crisis and conflict are 2 sides of the same coin. Crisis is something that happens outside in the environment, and conflict is people's reaction to it. So just imagine, a crisis can be as small as, let's say, people sitting in a meeting room and suddenly the temperature starts going up. Let's say there is a problem with the heating system, or it's a hot country and there is a problem with the air conditioning system. When that would happen, that some people would feel uncomfortable sooner than others. And when they feel uncomfortable, then our brains send this kind of panic reactions. That's the crisis. The conflict is when somebody expresses themselves, let's say, in an impatient way because they are feeling under pressure, and they say, could somebody open a goddamn window? Or snapping at the hotel staff. Why don't you do something? Can't you feel that we are boiling in here? And then somebody would be very likely to say, oh, leave them alone. They are just doing their job. And then we have conflict. So these are the 2 sides of exactly the same coin. Now, when we want to look at how each of us behaves in a situation, then we have to look at these 3 levels that I'm telling you. And I'm going to explain a little bit about the 3, but basically we have to look at why it is so difficult to be rational and use empathy in a high pressure situation, in a conflict or crisis situation. Whenever you, let's say, hear advice about how to deal with a high pressure situation, or even if you do a training, they usually focus on the head. They will give you something like a logical sequence of actions, what you are supposed to observe, what you are supposed to think through, what are the 3 steps. But you also notice that it's very difficult to follow that advice. That is the case because actually our head, our smart brain, is overruled when we are in a high pressure situation. And the reason why most experts who train you how to behave under a high pressure situation is to breathe is because it is the gut, it is our stress hormones that override our smart self. And then in between the two, there is basically the heart, which stands for not just the connection between our gut reaction and the rational reaction, but also between people. So let me explain a little bit. If you look at what happens in a crisis situation, now let's look at the right side of the slide. The first thing that happens is that we notice something strange in the environment. Let's say that people are arguing with each other, or that the room is getting hotter, or that, for example, clients suddenly start canceling all the orders. Now, some people perceive this in a different way from others. So we go on to the second one, which is perception. You probably know that some people, when the heat is rising and the pressure is mounting, some people tend to see it as an opportunity, and some people tend to panic a little bit faster. Some people can even see it as a funny situation. You know, something is finally happening. Now, that's when gut reactions start differing from each other, and that's when people start arguing. Imagine that clients start canceling. You can imagine different kind of reactions for it. Some of them will start blaming the client. Some of them will start thinking, what are we doing wrong? Some of them will blame one another within the team. And some of them say, well, listen, look at this. This could be an opportunity, and at least we have more attention to the clients who don't cancel. So now we are at the interaction level. And finally, the next stage of this, from the environmental change to how we subjectively perceive the problem, to our gut reactions to the problem, to interaction between people, is what to do next. Now, all these things are influenced by all these 3 factors. And I don't have the time to go into details for the gut, the heart, and the head. But the most important thing is that the gut level, your first gut reaction, is something you cannot control. It comes from your personality. It comes from your deepest genetic code. So if you tell yourself, you know, under pressure, I have to be more patient, I have to use more empathy, it is a very, very difficult change. It is much easier to build awareness about yourself and to, to be prepared for your own gut reaction. So, for example, some people, when they are under high pressure, become fearful. Some people become aggressive. It is much easier to know your personal reaction than to change your gut reaction. Then, if you know how you will behave, then you also know how you will interact with others. So, for example, personally, under pressure, I become more on the aggressive side rather than the panicky side. Then I know myself that in these cases, I will tend to lash out at others. And then you can go up to the head, and basically you can build a countermeasure both on the individual level and on the team level. So if I am the kind of person who under pressure has a tendency to raise my voice, blame others, lash out a little bit, then I can create something like an action plan for myself. I can communicate it to my team so that they are prepared. And if I'm the leader of an organization, I can even create a plan on the organizational level. The way I learned this is it goes back to my previous life as a junior diplomat. I was working for international organizations, and I was specialized in internal war, post-civil war reconstruction. So I was specialized in countries like Cambodia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. This picture was taken in Bosnia-Herzegovina in, I think, in 99 or 2000. And what I learned in those environments is that whatever people say when everything is calm, and whatever processes they build to deal with crisis and conflict along these 5, let's say, stages that I showed to you, You basically don't know how you will act under high pressure, just like you don't know how other people will react. So one of the ways, and I'm going to talk to you about this, one of the ways to build up this skill set that we are talking about this is observe yourself and others under mild pressure. Whatever happens to you under mild pressure, for example, when your boss gives you strong negative feedback, or when the client cancels, or when a prospective client or a supplier gives you a completely unfair demand, observe yourself, build awareness, how you react, and that's what would happen to you under a much higher pressure situation. So this is something I learned. I will be very happy to share more with you, especially now because of the Ukraine crisis. Many of these kind of experiences from my previous job are flashing back. Then in 2002, I left this profession. I came to China. Actually, this year is going to be my 20th China anniversary. And I started working with corporate managers. Now, you can imagine that when I coach a corporate manager and an executive, or I train a leadership team, and they tell me, listen, Gabor, we understand about the system that you are telling us, but you cannot imagine the level of pressure that we are under because we are dealing, for example, with high value investments. So after my previous career, also I am Hungarian by birth, but I spent about half of my childhood in the Middle East because I was an expat kid. I can imagine the kind of pressure that happens to them and could happen to them. As long as you keep some kind of clarity, you build awareness, and then you predict your own behavior, actually these methods do work. Yeah, one question already came out. How people of green disc personality coordinator people to get along with the red one, aggressive and dominant. Okay, so this is from Emma, and this is one step ahead of where we are right now. So let me go into the disc and show you. I always start with awareness, so I will first show you why we need the disc at all, and then I will show you how. So you will notice that the right side of the slide has stayed the same. So what we are doing now is we still look at change in the environment, then we react to the environment in the sense that we have some kind of emotional reaction to it. Our gut reaction is to interpret what is happening, then we interact with others, and then we look at the next steps. We use the DISC system to explain these kind of situations for the very simple reason that the best tools available in the market to analyze intercultural situations, including conflicts, are based on this 2x2 DISC system. So again, maybe we will go in a little bit more detail, but what I want to say at this time is that DISC is about the balancing of two basic human desires. One of them is to be in charge of our own future, basically, so to be in control of what happens to us. And the other one is to be accepted and liked and to cooperate with other people. So the control side is the up-down angle. And we have proactive, or if you want, extroverted, high control attitudes. And we have responsive, or if you want, introverted or low control attitudes. So for example, if you cook for your family and you usually cook what you want to cook, then it is a high control, proactive, extroverted way of cooking. If you usually first ask people what they want to eat and you cook what they want, that's the responsive, introverted, low control attitude. There is no good and bad when we deal with these kind of behavioral systems. Both attitudes have pros and cons in different kind of situations. The proactive, the outgoing attitude is to stay in control, get what you want, basically. The responsive attitude is to look around, observe the environment carefully, identify needs, and respond to them. And then we have the left-right angle, the practical versus social angle, which is the practical is more about trying to be rational, trying to be objective, and trying to get things done in life. In this case, the best metaphor is driving. So task-focused drivers, they usually drive following the rules, and following the vehicle. So for example, they change their speed according to what's best for the car. They change lanes by following the traffic lights, they following the lines on the road. Whereas on the right side, we have the social attitude, which is more about action based on what others dictate to us, suggest, say, and so on. And social drivers, they have a tendency not to look at the rules and the regulations so much, but look at the other drivers. So those are the people who change lanes according to who is where at the moment, and are they looking at me, are they letting me in, and so on. So at this moment, I don't want to go too much into it, but basically the proactive practical attitude is the high control competitive red. Please read the 5 words inside so that you get familiar if you're not familiar already. The proactive and social attitude is the disruptive, fun, extroverted, flexible yellow. The social responsive is the service-minded, patient, helpful, supportive green. And the practical responsive is the risk-avoiding, planning, cautious, and calm blue. Now, what does it depend on? Because please remember and look at the right again. First of all, when something happens in the environment that is critical, your first perception, what you see, it already depends on which color you represent, or which colors, because actually everybody represents all the colors, but the priority is different. And then if you, for example, if there is a huge market change, suddenly disruptive market change, if you see danger or opportunity, if you think it was my fault or their fault, it very much depends on which colors you represent. Your gut reaction that you cannot even control. Are you fearful? Are you angry? Are you regretful? That also depends on which colors you represent. How you are interacting with others. So first of all, if you feel a very negative emotion, are you even going to show people that you feel that negative emotion? That depends on which colors you represent. And also which options are available to you. That depends on which colors you represent. So the first thing is the individual level. And already on the individual level, it is half nature and half nurture. So which color you represent, it depends on your genetic code. Actually, we inherit some of it. So that's why parents keep wondering, you know, our little girl is so brave. Does it come from the mother or the father? And then sometimes they find out, it's more like the grandmother. But also it's nurture. It means where you were born, how you were raised, in what kind of family you were raised. You know, your parents were, let's say, lab workers for a pharmaceutical company or police. Of course, that is going to also influence your gut reaction. As you can see, when we map individual managers, then we use these percentages. So people do a quick assessment. It takes about 10 minutes to answer a couple of questions. Maybe you have done it already. And then it comes out, for example, this manager that you can see here is 46% blue, which is high, but not extremely high. And then about a quarter red, about a quarter yellow, and more or less 0 green, which means this person is going to be fairly compliant, fairly calm, fairly predictable, but also quite flexible across the other 2 styles of red and yellow. Okay, then we can look at teams. So we assess an entire management team and we create this kind of team map. And you can see, for example, this is an engineering company, and accordingly you can see that overwhelming majority of the people, the full circle is primary style, the dashed circle is secondary style. So you can see that most people are primary blue, but there are secondary reds and secondary yellows. It is very important because if you map teams, then you can see how well they are going to agree with each other. So this team is going to be in agreement most of the time, but that's not necessarily a good thing, because for highly functional teams, we need some kind of diversity. And this is what we don't have enough of in this case. Other teams are more balanced. Maybe I will show you other maps. Now we go higher. We started with the individual, we go to teams, then we go to professions. You probably notice that even in the same company, salespeople, I'm going around the disc, D-I-S-C. Red, yellow, green, blue. Salespeople, marketing people, so sales red, marketing yellow, HR green, let's say accountants, architects, lawyers, they think differently. They have a different level of crisis tolerance. They have a different level of risk tolerance. So now we are here. Which colors you represent, it depends on how you were born, your personality, your upbringing, and then the professional environment, and finally, different countries also represent different styles. It does not mean all people from that country represent that style. It means your country's style influences your behavior. It can be in agreement or disagreement with your country. Researchers say that about half of the people in each country are a good representation, let's say a typical representation of the value sets of those countries. All right, so Emma says, how people from the green style get along with the red style. The interesting thing about this system is what you do is basically find out what direction do you need to take in order to get along with others. So look at this. The green style is responsive and social. The red style is proactive and practical. So actually they are opposite each other. This is the most difficult situation to interact. So for the green style to interact with the yellow or the blue is easier than to interact with the red. Okay, now let's look at the solutions. First of all, you can map your own team. I chose this picture because this was actually taken in Russia. So I very often, I think about it now, all the managers that I trained in Russia and the Ukraine, where could they be and what could happen to them? It is a stark reminder of where even the simplest human conflict can take us if we don't take care of it early. So this was actually an international leadership team in Russia in 2019. You can simply play this game with describing the 4 styles to your people and asking them, what is your number 2 and your number 1 and number 2 slide? Draw it on a flip chart like this. It costs absolutely no money. And then you can see the balance of your team. So for example, here you can see that the balance of the team is mostly the blue style. Okay, then let's look at what we can do. So first of all, one of the reasons why it's difficult to get along, let's say green style to red style, because red is dominant, is outgoing. The red philosophy is that if you have a problem, say it. If you have an opinion, say it. If you have a thought, say it. The green philosophy is, I speak when I am asked. Obviously, others will be sensitive about my feelings, so I don't have to remind them. And this is why the red-green conversations are so, how do you say, unsuccessful very often. Now, I can only tell you what you do. I don't like telling you what other people should do. So for example, if you are trying to solve a conflict with the other department, I don't like coming up with the conclusion that the other department should do this and that. I am, let's say, your consultant or your coach, so I can only tell you what options there are for you. And from the question, it suggests that you are the green style. So the first thing that you have to be aware of is that you are green style. It's very important to know, to tell you, I am the kind of person who is a little bit uncomfortable speaking up, challenging others, voicing negative opinions. It's important to know, because then you will know, you will not in your mind blame the other side unconditionally for the conflict. The other thing is that to remind yourself that in a healthy team, in a healthy department, in a healthy company, you need a diversity of all the styles. Because when we are in a conflict situation, we very often think caring for others, patience, caution, good. Risk-taking, competitiveness, bad. A very important thing that we have to remind ourselves of is that our team needs both of these styles. Now, this is where the trick comes. When you look at the different styles and when you look at the two responsive styles, the green and the blue, the biggest problem with conflict is that if you are red or yellow style, you don't know you are in conflict with the green and the blue style. Because red and yellow, if they have a problem with you, they say it immediately. Blue and green, if they have a problem with you, they wait to be asked. So half of the human conflict in the world is hidden. And some styles are even proud of this. Just think about the harmonious society concept in China, is that actually when you have a problem with somebody, you don't say it. You keep it to yourself and you try to pretend everything is okay. But actually in a human team, the earlier we can storm, find a way to somehow share the issue of conflict, the better. That's why a lot of consultants, they recommend that, let's say, if you can see that your team doesn't agree, find a way to anonymously share something about the situation. For example, there are two options to go forward. Would you like to choose option A or option B? One thing that you can do is you can ask each of your team members to write their choice on a piece of paper without their names and put it in a box and do like an anonymous vote. Interaction. Now we come to task or people focused. And the red and the blue styles will prefer to solve the problem even if it makes people unhappy. The yellow and the green styles, they prefer to take care of people even if it means wasting some resources. So this is the big issue with the green style getting along with the red style. So first of all, to notice that the red style is necessary. Secondly, to speak up, to help the red style to see that you have a problem with their approach. And then finally, to try to objectively decide, for example, do we have the resources to build consensus? In this case, the resources is time. Do we have enough time to build consensus? Can we afford to create a people-centered solution? Or the other way around, is the conflictual, high-risk attitude of the red style killing our business? Now we can go back to the question by, was it David? Sales and R&D. Now, I would like to ask David, if you can use your mic, please do. If you cannot, then please type. Could you describe in 2 or 3 adjectives, what is your R&D team like? So some R&D teams are more like engineers. Some R&D teams are more like disruptive innovators. Some R&D teams are actually code writers. Some R&D teams are idea creators. David, what is your R&D team like? Innovative.
So innovation. Yeah,
okay,
innovation.
okay. Because, you know, in some societies, and now I'm going to blow this up and I'm going back to this one. Sales is sometimes red. You know, these kind of pushy, fast, competitive salespeople that sales departments often call hunters. Or salespeople can be blue, the farmers, the people who know most about the products, the people who know all the specifications, the procedures. So we have to look at what kind of sales we are dealing with here. But let's say we are dealing with a hunter sales, which represents the outgoing, competitive, result-orientated, winning hunter kind of sales. And then we have the innovator, the yellow kind of R&D. Their most basic problem is going to be that the sales sees R&D as wasteful, unpredictable. a little bit like artists, and they are going to be a little bit angry at the R&D people that they are all over the place, they don't have the focus, and they will have the feeling that sales tries very hard to build business, and then R&D doesn't have the focus to deliver the promise that salespeople made. So this could be the source of conflict. As you can see, this is a source of left-right conflict. So basically, it means that the practical or the social aspect is going to be the key to the conflict. Here, the salespeople have to remember they are the ones who have a higher level of control. It is their job to make R&D ideas digestible for the client. R&D doesn't even necessarily have direct contact with the client. And then if the company chose an R&D function that has to be creative, artistic, a little bit disruptive, usually these companies give enough resources to the R&D department to experiment, make mistakes, learn from it, and so on. In this case, sales just usually has to live with this, plan ahead, look at the best outcome of this kind of R&D process, and translate it and package it so that they can sell it to the client. It is very important because in this case, the R&D department is not a practical, is not a highly result-orientated department. If the R&D were more like, because for example, I worked for telecom companies, I worked for pharmaceutical companies, an awful lot, there your R&D is going to be more blue style. You know, people who work in the lab, people who write codes and so on. There it's completely different. There usually the sales and R&D conflict is an up and down conflict. Is that sales wants to push faster, sales wants more flexible solutions, and sales wants to win. Whereas the R&D department, which is blue style, they want more resources, they want more time, and they are probably going to create a product that is too complex and too expensive for the taste of sales's work style. In both cases, we have to look at who is in charge. And unfortunately, sales is usually in charge. So basically in companies, what is happening is that the company creates the product or creates the concept and sales is supposed to translate it into a simple and impactful enough language so that the client can understand it. If sales has the, how do you say, the time and the communication skills to influence R&D, to help them understand the product and maybe simplify the product so that it's easier to sell, that is great. But in this case, sales usually has to initiate the communication process because it is sales that is both task focused and high controlled. Okay, I hope I'm helping with this. Of course, we are trying to simplify a fairly complex situation. Is there anything else? The difference perception of the Ukraine situation in Swedish companies. Let's look at the country map. Look at number one, environment. Number two, perception. So let me go through very quickly the four styles. When something terrible like the Ukraine crisis happens, and this was exactly my job in Bosnia-Herzegovina and a couple of other places. So war breaks out, absolute tragedy, human tragedy. That is what happens in the environment. Usually that impacts all of us, if nothing else than emotionally through the news, but very often there are refugees, there are disruptions in our business, there are needs. For example, our company suddenly has to supply something that we didn't before. And then the second one is perception. I think this is what your question is about. How do we see the situation differently? And if you look at the disc, there are a couple of very simple exceptions, simple explanations. And it's not just about something horrible like the Ukrainian crisis, but also, for example, if there is conflict within the company, proactive styles and responsive styles are different. Responsive styles, they usually emphasize with the victim. Proactive styles, they are more willing to also put themselves into the shoes of the aggressor. So basically, the green and the blue styles almost always say there is absolutely no excuse for aggression. Whereas the two proactive styles, the red and the yellow style, it doesn't matter how big the conflict is, they are more likely to say, wait a minute, I think maybe the other side didn't attack first, but they provoked, they did something unacceptable. We have to imagine that they upset or they cornered the party that initiated the aggression. Again, practical and social sides can be different as well, because the practical side will very heavily focus on what to do next, even if it makes people unhappy. Whereas the social side very often prioritizes expressing sympathy, calming people down, making sure that the crisis doesn't get worse. So when you are in a decision-making situation and you have to prioritize resources, very often you will experience clashes within your team regarding of what to do next. Now, the very important thing is that in these kind of intercultural situations, of course, we try to understand everybody. Of course, we try to make everybody feel as good and understood as they can. But both in business and in a crisis management situation like the Ukraine crisis that you asked about, there are certain objective realities. This is why, for example, if we are under heavy pressure, just imagine the beginning of the COVID crisis or the Ukraine crisis now. Usually, the balance shifts towards the red and blue styles, because those are the efficient styles. Those are the styles that can act fast. Those are the ones that can line up resources. And this is why in a crisis situation, leaders or departments who represent the red and the blue styles, they act first and the other styles follow. So in other words, if safety personnel wants to get you out of a burning building, they are not going to care too much about your feelings, right? If you want to evacuate the airplane, you have to leave all your belongings behind. It doesn't matter how it makes you feel. So crisis leadership is usually the red style or sometimes the blue style leadership. But we also have to represent that to stay in a crisis mode for too long, that is not sustainable, because it burns up too many resources. It takes away the priority from things like teamwork, from things like empathy, from things like morale. So if a red style, top-down, high-risk leadership persists for too long, then eventually even the basic functions of the team can suffer. Let me just quickly show my last slide, which is the contact slide. For example, one of you asked, can I recommend some good books? Now, if you scan this code or you go to www.holch.biz, which is my family name plus biz for business, and then you click on the tab reading, then you can see my favorite books on leadership, on intercultural skills. Obviously, one of the tabs of this website is the contact tab. So if you have any questions to me after this event, just type it in that tab and then I will receive it as an email. Did we do an okay job, Ida?
I think so. Very good presentation. Thank you so much. And to our participants, just to let you know that we will send out a recording from this webinar, and we will also share with you the presentation so you can access the link directly there.
I hope that, what I really hope is that I help you build some habits, and pressure is an ugly thing, so that you will manage to minimize it in your future work across different cultures.
Yeah, I see we have a comment in the chat here from Emma who says a really great presentation. Very appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Very useful. Thank you. Good presentation. Yes. So thank you all for listening in, and it's great to hear that it's been useful to our members.